Hello, and welcome to the Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm your host, David Battistella. Today on the Focusing Way podcast, our interview with Wholebody Focusing founder Kevin McEvanue. As we learn more about focusing, we learn that it is a bodily process. We rely on the body in focusing as a way to inform us. We want to feel and experience things through the body at a bodily level. We keep our body company. We endeavor to listen to its subtle messages. We sit with the things that may start out tight and confused, and we experience shifts in the body that may have been there for years, blocking our life force or our sense of rightness. Kevin McEvanue developed a form of focusing that has come to be known as whole body focusing, and he joins us today to share more about what he discovered through whole body focusing. And joining me right now is Kevin McEvanue. Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Kevin, I'd just like to begin by asking, how did whole body focusing begin?
It really began with my own experiencing. One thing followed another very organically. I was originally an Alexander teacher, exploring myself because I had what was then considered a lifelong deterioration of the spine. So I was extremely interested in other ways of handling this kind of condition after very bad experiences with operations that went wrong, to the sense of real humor in the whole situation. So I began that way. I began with the physical body, but then through my client base, I met Mary Armstrong, who was one of the originating people in the focusing community, who said whatever I was doing sounded like this guy, Gene Genlin. He was on a radio broadcast, and he was talking about focusing, and I was talking Alexander, but in a particular kind of way, so that she felt I need to explore this connection with this man, Gene Genlin, which I did in time. Not directly, I actually started with the bio-spiritual group. But that evolved, that I continued as an Alexander teacher, but I started to incorporate focusing as I was learning it, and how focusing, felt sensing really, opened doors to me in terms of how the body was opening up to itself. Because in a physical way, whether it's craniosacral or whatever, it's osteopathy, the body's having an experience of itself. But the focusing experience brought a language, brought a way of accessing this thing that's going on inside myself because of these changes, and I don't know what they are. It means. And so you can see how the two can come together, and that's how whole body focusing began, was the connection between physical changes that were pretty profound and meaning and language, which actually complemented one another, so that the two enhanced both experiences.
I'm just really appreciating that, because seems like so many other practices can become one with focusing, where focusing doesn't have to become the whole thing. Like nonviolent communication with focusing, they seem to go well together. In your case, Alexander and focusing. And could you talk a little bit about this sort of the welcoming nature of focusing, how it sort of meshes with whatever comes to it, as opposed to wanting to sort of take over in a dogmatic kind of way?
There's a kind of attitude, but it's more than an attitude. It's a reality that if I'm with something in me, with a welcoming, just noticing, it opens up to more to itself. If I'm there with a judgment or a criticism, it closes down. So it's a physical experience, but also an emotional experience of how to be with somebody else. And so we created, we call it the focusing attitude. It's a way of being with me, you, and anything inside of me that's an issue. I actually invite that part of me to become more aware of itself. It's not about me understanding it even, but about it having a sense of itself so that it becomes conscious of what it's doing, what's going on, because it doesn't know. But when it's invited by my consciousness to sense itself, it becomes self-aware. And in focusing, what that implies is that that part of me that's become self-aware, it now has choices it wouldn't normally have. It just automatically acts out of instinct and out of reflex, and it does to take care of itself, but it doesn't know why it's doing that, and it doesn't have the range of possibilities that focusing brings to it. Or that, I would say that attitude, which is the felt sensing of the situation.
Maybe you could speak a little bit more about when those parts are heard and how they begin to communicate with us through the body in their own way.
I'll give you an example because I love that. As you put that out, I think immediately of a part of myself, or I'm thinking of a situation. And I think of my kneecap. Actually, today it's a bit swollen, a little bit sore. So I invite that part of me, which is the knee, to become more aware of itself. First of all, I welcome it. It can feel my attention, and there's a feedback that it becomes more, if it's a bit painful, it'll become a little bit more painful. So I know we're engaged with one another. And then I invite it to have the space it needs to experience itself. It's like a little child. The child just needs to have the parent there so it can experience its life. Same with the knee. And as I do that, what I'm noticing instantly is a variety of things. First of all, the knee is there and it's active. It seems vital or alive in some way, even if it's a bit painful. But I also feel a connection from it to other parts of me. Like it knows how to connect for support from the bigger me, let's call it, the whole of me in the end, but it's the bigger me. And at the same time, I can feel some energy going down into my foot, into my legs, and there's some movement. So movement is a part of that bodily experience of becoming alive to itself. That's where whole body movement, whole body focusing comes in, is the relationship between a part and the whole that does awaken a sense of internal movement. Life is essentially moving, and that's what happens. And if I take that a little further, it becomes much more physically present as a physical experience. But then sometimes I'll get an image or a word or a reference to some other time in my life, and I'm thinking of a specific situation, so I can bring it up to date from now. There's a woman who was we were starting on a session, and her knee actually went out, it got paralyzed. It does that from time to time, and it can last maybe a month or two. It's quite a serious thing. So we talked it through. And what it did release, and it did change, and it did all those wonderful things, but it also told her something about how she jumps off the edge of a situation. She's an actress, and she throws herself into something, and rather dramatically. And the knee is there to tighten to protect her life. That's what the body originally was about, was trying to hold her back from jumping off stuff. So it wasn't just a damage of a knee for her, it was actually a life preserver to keep her safe. That was the body's way of holding her from going over the edge. Yeah, holding back not to go over the edge because she's inclined to go over the edge. So there's a good example of a physical change that brings a kind of obvious healing, but also a meaningful situation of why it was there and is there in the first place. So we need both. We need to know why something is there. It's usually, even if it's an injury, it's probably for a good reason.
What I'm hearing you're describing is kind of what starts or presents as kind of an outer feeling in the knee, like what we would consider a soreness or a bruise, or pain, that leads to a specific kind of inner understanding as well that informs the whole. Can you sort of describe sort of then why or how you ended up coming up with the whole body? Like, why the whole body?
Well, first of all, I'll finish the part that you just said. So there's something, the whole, you said something about the whole, and then to me, to fill that out would be the whole story. And because it's not just a knee in part, it's the whole of you. So there's a wholeness quality. But the origin of the whole body is a very much of an Alexander discipline from Alexander himself, the originator, recognizing that any change in one part to really facilitate that transformation of that change required the contribution or the connection with the whole. A part doesn't change in isolation. It needs all the resources of the rest of you, the whole of you, to change a particular part. So there's a kind of an awareness that we don't live in parts. We live in, we can feel like cut off from a part. And that's one thing. But the actual functioning is always towards a sense of wholeness once again. That's quite significant. I mean, for my eyes, for example, I think of my eyeball seeing something, but actually it does. It receives information in the sun through the rays. It's a certain animation, but the stimulation actually comes from many parts of the body to bring that visual experience to fruition. I feel many things that make that a whole experience of myself, and obviously in three-dimensional form. But it does require the whole participation. I like that. The participation of the whole self to facilitate a change in the self.
Could you share a little bit about your own story, about some of your personal experiences with focusing, some physical challenges, perhaps?
Yeah, so let me just think about that a moment. Well, the most obvious one happened maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I had a cataract operation. This is, this is my story. And on the operating table, it was whatever happened. The eye got infected and it went blind. And the judgment was that it would never see again. It had staphylococcus, I think it was called, staph infection anyways. And that took the sight. And they did whatever they could do, but there's not much they can do when that takes over. It could have been much more serious, actually. But with my partner, my focusing partner, and my life partner at that time, I began to focus on that part of the eye on a daily basis, and it began to show some sign of stimulation. It wasn't easy, but it began to show, first of all, light, and a fair amount of pain. But I continued. So I was beginning to see. So I got a C chart, which is the visual charts that doctors use, and I started to focus on the sight in connection with this chart daily. And make it short, is after a period of maybe a year or two, I got about 98% of my sight back. And so it is though the body, with that kind of attention, was able to restore itself in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. And then there's meaning, because there's a whole story of why it purely an operational mistake in the surgical. The instruments weren't sterilized. Was it simply that, and to blame it on that, or was it also part of me who didn't want to see? And that goes back to childhood and about story. So it wasn't just one answer to a complexity of that restoration, but it informed. I knew from intuitively in some way it wasn't all just about the doctor, etc. It was also about the way I was with myself. So that's one concrete example.
So through that process, could you just sort of share with me what that was like, being with that eye in a focusing way, and sort of entering into that relationship with that specific part of you, and really sort of inviting that sense of wanting to see again, or maybe just wanting to know. What was that like, sort of daily?
Again, it's complex. I wanted to know. I'm a watercolor painter. I have a show once a year, so I have a thing that was emerging, and that would be stopped in some way. So there was an investment there, but that was only the surface of it. I think the eye itself wanted me to know more about it and its story in me. So it really loved that I gave it attention. It responded by doing what it could to find the resources within itself and within the whole of me, my own inner wisdom as an animal body, to restore the sight. But it also wanted to know more about me as a person. So like those locked childhood traumas, if you want to call them that didn't find any way at that time to come to consciousness. Now it comes more and more to consciousness by degree. Not only my own history of not seeing, but it's just generational. So it's not just my story, it's probably a much larger story in the context of who I am and in my own history, which is, larger than me in some way.
focusing, and the whole body. We've been listening to Wholebody Focusing founder Kevin McEvanue. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation in the next episode. You've been listening to the Focusing Way podcast, available on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm your host, David Battistella. Please take a moment to visit our website at thefocusingway.com.